The rain hit the truck stop windows like gravel thrown by ghosts. Inside, two men sat in a corner booth near the coffee machine. Nobody looked at them twice. Just another pair of truckers killing time on Highway 65. But in the next 20 minutes, one of them would walk away from a friendship that had survived more than most marriages, and the other would sit alone with a bottle and a choice that would define the rest of his life. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in November 1975. The truck stop was one of those nameless places between Nashville and Memphis, where the coffee was always burnt and the waitress always looked tired. The kind of place where nobody asks questions and nobody expects answers. Johnny Cash sat with his back to the wall, wearing the same black suit he'd worn on stage 6 hours earlier. His coffee was cold. He hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. Across from him, Waylon Jennings drummed his fingers on the table, his eyes darting between the window, the door, and anywhere except Johnny's face. They'd been friends for over a decade, had toured together, recorded together, gotten high together in motel rooms from California to Carolina. Waylon had been there when Johnny was at his worst, when the pills had turned him into something that barely resembled human. And Johnny had been there when Waylon's first marriage fell apart, when the music industry tried to break him, when the darkness felt like it would never end. But tonight was different. Tonight Johnny Cash was sober, had been for almost 3 years, and Waylon Jennings was high as a kite, trying desperately to pretend he wasn't. Have you ever watched someone you love destroy themselves and known there was nothing you could do to stop it? That's where Johnny Cash was sitting, in a booth at a truck stop on Highway 65, watching his best friend lie to his face. The waitress brought fresh coffee. Johnny thanked her quietly. Waylon ordered a Coke he wouldn't drink. When she left, the silence settled back over them like fog. "You look good, man," Waylon said finally, forcing brightness into his voice. "Real good. Clean suits you." Johnny didn't respond. He just looked at his friend with those dark eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Waylon shifted in his seat. "I mean it. You're doing great. The new album, the shows, June, you got it all figured out." "How much did you take tonight?" Johnny asked quietly. The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. "What are you talking about?" Waylon laughed, but it came out wrong. Too loud, too defensive. "I'm fine. I'm just tired from the drive." Johnny said nothing. He knew the signs too well, the jaw tension, the rapid speech, the way Waylon's pupils were dilated even though they'd been sitting in bright fluorescent light for 30 minutes. He'd spent years looking at those same signs in the mirror. "Since when did you become a preacher?" Waylon said, his tone sharpening. "I drove 2 hours to see you, and this is how you greet me? With accusations?" "I didn't accuse you of anything," Johnny said, his voice still quiet, still controlled. "I asked a question." Waylon looked out the window at the rain. "You know what your problem is, Cash? You got clean, and suddenly you think everyone else is dirty, like you're better than the rest of us now." Johnny picked up his coffee, took a slow sip even though it was cold. "Is that what you think? I think you forgot where you came from, who your friends are, who stood by you when you were the one showing up late, forgetting lyrics, passing out backstage." "You're right," Johnny said simply. "You did stand by me, and I'm grateful. That's why I'm here." But what Johnny didn't say, what Waylon could hear in the silence, was the rest of that sentence. "That's why I'm here, watching you make the same mistakes I made, knowing how it ends." The truck stop was nearly empty. A long-haul driver sat at the counter, reading a newspaper. 2 teenagers in the corner booth shared a milkshake. The waitress leaned against the register, staring at nothing. Outside, 18-wheelers rumbled past on the wet highway, their lights cutting through the darkness for just a moment before disappearing again. Waylon reached into his jacket pocket. Johnny watched his hand move. watched him pull out a silver flask, watched him set it on the table between them like a challenge. "For old times," Waylon said. Johnny stared at the flask. He knew exactly what was in it. Not whiskey. Waylon never drank much whiskey. It would be amphetamines dissolved in water, the same mixture Johnny used to carry in his own flask, the same poison that had nearly killed him 100 times. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become legend among the people who knew them both, not because it was loud or dramatic, because it was the opposite, because it was two exhausted men and the truth sitting between them like a third person at the table. "I'm done, Waylon," Johnny said quietly. "And you should be too." Waylon's hand closed around the flask. "You don't get to tell me what to do." "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you where that road goes, because I've been down it, all the way to the end, and the end isn't pretty." "I'm fine," Waylon insisted. "I'm not like you were. I can handle it. I know my limits." Johnny almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, because he'd said those exact words to June, to his manager, to himself in the mirror at 4 a.m., when his hands were shaking and his heart was racing and he couldn't remember if he'd taken 3 pills or 13. "That's what I said too," Johnny replied. "Right up until I woke up in a jail cell. Right up until June found me passed out in the front yard. Right up until I couldn't remember my daughter's birthday because I'd been high for 3 weeks straight." Waylon looked away. "This is different." "How?" "Because I'm not you." The words landed like a punch. Not because they were meant to hurt, because they were true. Waylon wasn't Johnny. He was his own person, with his own demons, fighting his own war. And that was exactly the problem. Because every addict thinks they're different. Every addict thinks they're the exception, right up until they're not. Have you ever tried to save someone who didn't want to be saved? That's the thing about addiction. You can't rescue someone who's still convinced they're not drowning. Johnny leaned back against the booth. Outside, the rain was getting heavier. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. The truck stop lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating patterns that looked almost beautiful if you didn't think too hard about where you were. "You remember that night in Phoenix?" Johnny asked suddenly. Waylon's jaw tightened. "Don't." "You remember? 1967. I was so high I couldn't stand up straight. Forgot half the words to I Walk the Line. Fell off the stage during the encore." "Ancient history," Waylon muttered. "You drove me back to the hotel, sat with me all night while I shook and sweated and saw things that weren't there. You didn't judge me, didn't preach. You just stayed." Waylon's hand was still on the flask, but his grip had loosened. "You know what you told me that night?" Johnny continued. "You said, 'This is going to kill you, Cash. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually this is going to kill you.' You were right. It almost did." "So what?" Waylon's voice cracked slightly. "You want me to thank you for the life lesson? You want me to flush my pills and join your church and pretend everything's sunshine and redemption? I want you to live long enough to see your kids grow up," Johnny said simply. That's all. The silence that followed was different, heavier, because they both knew Johnny wasn't exaggerating. Waylon had 2 young children, and if he kept going the way he was going, he might not make it to their next birthday. The waitress walked by with a coffee pot, offering refills. Johnny nodded. Waylon waved her away. When she left, he finally took his hand off the flask. "It's not that easy," Waylon said quietly. "I know. You don't just stop. Your whole life is built around it. The touring, the recording, the late nights, the pressure, the pills help you get through it." "No," Johnny said. "The pills help you avoid it. There's a difference." Waylon looked at him then, really looked at him, and for just a moment the defensive anger fell away. What was left underneath was something rawer, fear, exhaustion. the face of a man who was tired of fighting but didn't know how to stop. "I don't know if I can do what you did," Waylon admitted. "You won't," Johnny said. "Not the same way, because you're not me. You'll do it your own way, on your own time, but you have to want it. And if I don't, if I'm not ready?" Johnny stood up slowly. He pulled out his wallet, left enough cash on the table to cover both their coffees and a generous tip. When he looked down at Waylon, his expression was unreadable. Not angry, not disappointed, just sad. "Then I can't watch," Johnny said. "I love you too much to watch you die." Waylon's eyes widened. "You're leaving?" "When you're ready, I'll be there. You know where to find me. June knows, my manager knows. We'll drop everything and we'll help you. But I can't sit here and pretend this is okay. I can't enable you by staying silent. That's not friendship, that's cowardice." Johnny picked up his hat from the seat beside him, put it on slowly, the way he did everything, deliberate, final. "Wait," Waylon said, but he didn't stand up, didn't reach out, didn't ask him to stay. Johnny looked at his friend one last time, memorized his face, because he didn't know if this was goodbye for a week or goodbye forever. In this life, with these demons, you never knew. "I'll pray for you," Johnny said quietly. "Every night, and I'll answer the phone when you call. But I won't pretend, not anymore." Then he turned and walked toward the door. His boots made soft sounds on the linoleum floor. The teenager's jukebox was playing something by Merle Haggard. The rain continued to hammer the windows, and Waylon Jennings sat alone in a booth with a flask on the table and a choice in front of him. Johnny pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain. Didn't run, didn't hurry, just walked to his car in that same steady pace, got in and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the darkness, and Waylon watched them go. The waitress came by again. "Your friend left?" "Yeah," Waylon said. "He left." She nodded and walked away. Waylon stared at the flask for a long time. Picked it up once, put it down, picked it up again. The truck stop around him continued its late-night rhythm. Truckers came and went. Coffee brewed. Rain fell. Nobody in that truck stop knew they'd just witnessed something important. They didn't know that in that booth, between two old friends, a line had been drawn. Not out of anger, not out of judgment, but out of love. What Waylon did next would take years to fully unfold. He didn't get clean that night, didn't pour the flask down the drain and walk into the light. Real life doesn't work that way. But something shifted. Something Johnny said, or maybe something Johnny didn't say, planted itself deep. It would be 3 more years before Waylon Jennings finally got sober. 3 years of near misses, close calls, and moments that almost ended everything. But when he finally did it, when he finally chose life over the pills, the first person he called was Johnny Cash, and Johnny answered on the first ring. Years later, in an interview, Waylon was asked about the night that changed his life. He didn't talk about rehab or hitting rock bottom or any dramatic moment of clarity. He talked about a truck stop on Highway 65, about rain and cold coffee and a friend who loved him enough to walk away. "Johnny didn't save me that night," Waylon said. "He did something harder. He let me go. He trusted me enough to fall on my own, knowing I'd eventually learn to stand back up. That takes more courage than catching someone, because you have to live with the possibility they might not make it." The interviewer asked what Johnny said when Waylon finally called him 3 years later. Waylon smiled, and his eyes got wet. He said, "I've been waiting. Let's get you home." That's the thing about real friendship. It's not about never leaving. Sometimes it's about knowing when to leave, about drawing lines not out of cruelty, but out of love, about trusting someone enough to let them fall, because you know that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings would remain friends until Johnny's death in 2003. They'd record together, tour together, and grow old together. But they never forgot that night on Highway 65. The night one friend walked away so the other could learn to walk on his own. Maybe that's what real friendship looks like. Not always being there, but knowing when to leave so someone can find their own way home.